The base station was picking up a localized signal on a dead frequency. It wasn't words. It was this fast, metallic clicking sound, followed by a voice that sounded like a cheap plastic toy with a dying battery. It was saying the little girl's name over and over. Hello, loves. I hope you've got the doors locked and you're not listening alone. Welcome to Madam Nightmare. If you look up the FOIA data for the National Park Service around 1981, you'll find a file labeled 81-Delta-09. It's almost entirely blacked out. Just pages and pages of thick marker ink that look like barcodes. But whoever was doing the redactions got lazy on page 14 and left a single paragraph completely untouched. Subject's boots recovered intact. Laces tied in double knots. No blood, no organic tissue inside. Search dogs refused to approach the perimeter. My granddad was a tactical tracker for the Park Service back then. He never talked about his time in the woods, not when he was active, and definitely not after he retired to a cabin in the middle of nowhere with 3 separate deadbolts on every door. But when his dementia got bad a few years ago, the filter in his brain just kind of dissolved. He didn't know who I was anymore, but he couldn't stop talking about the ridge. We were 4 miles past the marked trail, he told me one night. He was just staring into a blank television screen, his knuckles white, where he was gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. A little girl had wandered away from her parents' campsite. Clear afternoon, ground was soft from rain. It should have been an easy afternoon track. He said they followed her footprints straight toward a massive pile of granite boulders. The prints were deep, clean, and perfectly spaced in the mud. Then, right at the edge of the rock, they just stopped. Not like she fell, and not like she jumped. The mud showed a heavy imprint of her right heel, and then nothing. Just empty stone. The tracking dogs, these massive bloodhounds that usually tore through the brush like chainsaws, hit that exact spot and completely froze. They didn't bark. They didn't whine. Granddad said they dropped their tails, pressed their bellies flat against the wet dirt, and literally clawed at the mud, trying to crawl backward away from the rocks. We called for the choppers with the thermal cams, Granddad whispered. I had to lean all the way in just to hear him over the hum of his oxygen tank. The sky was totally clear, but the cameras showed absolutely nothing, just cold rock. But then the radio operator back at base camp started losing his mind over the communications. The actual audio log wasn't in the files, but Granddad remembered every word. The base station was picking up a localized signal on a dead frequency. It wasn't words. It was this fast, metallic clicking sound, followed by a voice that sounded like a cheap plastic toy with a dying battery. It was saying the little girl's name over and over, but the pitch was completely wrong. Like whatever was making the noise was trying to figure out how human mouths work. Granddad looked right at me then, his eyes suddenly clear and terrified. The paperwork says she succumbed to the elements. That's the official lie they tell the parents, he said. But we found her jacket 3 days later, 5 miles up the peak where no kid could climb without ropes. It was folded. Perfectly square, sitting on top of a boulder. He leaned in so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. When I picked up that jacket, it was hot, like it had just been pulled out of a clothes dryer, and from the branches right above my head, I heard that same clicking sound. I didn't look up. I just ran. Granddad passed away 3 weeks later. When we went to clean out his cabin, we found his old service journals in a trunk. Every single page detailing his final year on the tracking team had been cleanly sliced out with a razor blade. I hadn't thought about it in years until this morning. A local news alert popped up on my phone. A hiker went missing yesterday at noon, right on that exact same ridge. The report ended with a weird detail. The search parties are currently halted because the dogs are refusing to enter the tree line. If you ever find yourself digging through any old declassified U.S. Forest Timber Management files, look up the incident report for the Skeleton Peak Lookout Tower out in Idaho. Dated May 1974. The paperwork says the guy stationed up there had a severe psychological break brought on by the isolation. Standard government brush-off. But someone forgot to pull the raw radio log sheet that was taped to the very back of the station logbook. The last entry wasn't a rambling cry for help. It was just a time and a note. 3:14 a.m. The canopy isn't moving with the wind anymore. The tops of the pines are bending toward each other in a closed circle. The shadows are wrong. My grandfather's cousin, Dale, used to talk about that report before he died. Dale was a low-altitude aerial surveyor for the Forestry Department back in the late 60s, flying a beaten-up two-seater Cessna just over the tree line. His whole job was taking infrared photos to map out beetle infestations and root rot across the Pacific Northwest. He'd flown in the military and wasn't the type to rattle easily. He handled heavy mountain turbulence like he was driving a tractor down a dirt road. But he grounded himself permanently after a routine run near the Canadian border. We were flying a standard grid at 2,000 feet, Dale told me one afternoon. He wasn't looking at me. He just kept his eyes down, wiping down an old hunting rifle with an oil rag. Clear sky, smooth air. But the second we crossed the ridge into this one specific unmapped valley, the engine noise just died down. It didn't sputter or fail. It just got quiet, like someone threw a heavy wool blanket over the whole cockpit. He looked down at the infrared camera monitor bolted to the dash. Normally, an infrared feed of a forest shows a messy, scattered fuzz of heat signatures from living trees and deer. This didn't look like that. The monitor showed these massive, blindingly hot geometric bands cutting through the trees. Dale said they looked like bright, pulsing veins or highway lanes stretching straight through the brush for miles. I figured it was a lens glare or some kind of chemical fire, Dale muttered, his jaw tight. So I popped the side window and leaned out to look down with my own eyes. The sun was dead overhead, but that valley was pitch black. He described a forest that looked like it had been turned to stone. Nothing was moving. Not a single branch or needle. Millions of old-growth Douglas firs were locked completely rigid, but they weren't growing upward anymore. For miles in every direction, the tops of the trees had snapped sideways at ugly, sharp angles, weaving their branches together to form a seamless wooden roof over the forest floor. It looked like a giant basket woven out of living wood, completely choking out the ground. Then the radio started up. It wasn't static, Dale whispered. It was a heavy, rhythmic clicking, like 1,000 wooden telegraph keys all being slammed down at the exact same time. It was coming from the trees themselves, and the vibration got so violent it started backing the rivets right out of our instrument panel. Before he could pull up, the Cessna started sinking. The engine was revving fine, but the air density above that wooden roof had completely vanished. The plane was getting sucked down toward the canopy like it was hitting a vacuum. Dale slammed the throttle through the firewall, pushing the engine until the gauges redlined, and barely cleared the southern ridge. He said he could hear the belly of the plane scraping across the very top of the wood as they broke out. When they bounced down onto the grass back at the airfield, the mechanics came running over. The underside of the aluminum fuselage wasn't scratched up by pine needles. It was slathered in a thick, jet-black grease that smelled like burnt copper and pennies. By the next morning, 2 guys from a federal agency showed up and confiscated Dale's flight logs his film canisters, and the monitoring equipment. 2 days after that, the valley was slapped with a restricted military airspace designation. Dale never told the bosses what he actually saw. But a few weeks before the cancer took him, he pulled a crumpled photo out of an old shoebox. He'd snapped it with a little personal pocket camera right as they cleared the ridge. It's a terrible, grainy picture of the valley from above. You can see the matted, woven roof of the forest stretching out for miles. But right in the dead center, the trees part just enough to show a massive, clean circle of chalk-white bones, perfectly hidden from anyone standing on the ground. My dad worked as a surveyor for the Forest Service back in the 70s. He didn't talk about his job much, but the summer before he died of lung cancer, he finally told me why he abruptly quit the Lewis River Project in 1973. If you look up the public engineering archives for the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, there's a massive gap in the records for that year. The official story was that they abandoned a deep earth seismology vault because they hit a massive underground water table that flooded the shafts. That's a lie. They didn't lose any pumps or rigs to water damage. They lost drill bits. My dad kept one of the ruined diamond-tipped bits in our garage for years. I used to mess with it when I was a kid. It didn't look like a tool anymore. The heavy tungsten head was completely deformed, not shattered, but literally mashed and flattened on one side like a piece of soft clay that had been slammed into an anvil. He told me they were down about 80 feet into solid granite when the rig just stopped making progress. But the engine didn't stall out. Instead, the pressure gauges spiked into the red, and the entire multi-ton truck frame actually groaned and lifted an inch off its stabilizers. Then came the sound. Dad said it wasn't the normal screech of teeth grinding against rock. It was a deep, heavy vibration that rattled the fillings in your teeth, like a massive electrical substation humming right beneath your boots. The foreman figured it was a high-density iron deposit causing some weird magnetic feedback, so they backed the rig off and dropped a downhole microphone on a steel winch line to map the pocket. Dad was the one holding the headset. He told me he didn't hear a cave echo or the thud of shifting stone. He heard a rhythm, a slow, heavy, mechanical dragging sound. Like two massive iron plates sliding past one another in the dark. Suddenly, the winch started spinning backward. It wasn't a sudden jerk. It was a smooth, unstoppable, high-torque pull. The brake on the winch started smoking from the friction, and before anyone could cut the power, the steel line went taut as a piano wire and snapped. When they reeled the remainder of the line back up, the end of the steel wasn't frayed or unraveled like a normal high-tension snap. The strands were completely fused together and blackened. Whatever took that line didn't just pull it. The friction or the heat melted it right through. The crew didn't even wait for the shift supervisor to clear them. They threw the tools in the trucks and drove out of the clearing before the sun went down. None of them went back. If you hike up to those coordinates today, you won't find an open shaft or a cave entrance. The government went back out there in the mid-'80s with concrete mixers. They poured hundreds of tons of grout straight down the hole to seal it, then put up chain link fencing and unstable ground warning signs. People like to look at the Pacific Northwest and see this beautiful, untouched wilderness. But ever since my dad told me that story, I can't look at the mountains the same way. The trees, the dirt, the rocks, it's just a top coat. It's camouflage. If you drill down deep enough, you're going to hit the metal. If you made it through tonight's collection, pass it on to someone you want to keep safe, or maybe someone special you'd like to haunt. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next nightmare. Until next time, loves, stay safe and sleep well.